Eskom has warned that if municipalities do not settle their debts, the power utility will find itself in deep financial difficulties. There are fears that if non-payment by municipalities remain in place, Eskom would be owed 200 billion rand by 2028. Back in 2023, National Treasury introduced a debt incentive scheme allowing municipalities to have a debt owed to Eskom written off if they stuck to monthly payments. But so far, only 14 municipalities out of 72 have adhered to their debt obligations. Joining us is Matthew Parks from Cosatu, as well as energy analyst Clyde Mallinson, to have this conversation. Good evening, gentlemen. Thanks for joining us this evening on News at Prime. Clyde, I'd like to start with you on this. I mean, Eskom seems to be cleaning up house and pulling up its socks, but at the same time, the municipalities aren't coming to the party. If we do continue on this track, which it seems we will if they are even unable to stick to the plan when there's an incentivized program, the chances are not to be the prophet of doom and gloom that is exactly where we're heading, to that astronomical debt.
Yeah, look, it's good that Eskom are putting new management structures in place, but quite clearly what's required is that the municipalities, and not only the defaulting ones, but most of our municipalities need to have new structures in place and have competent, honest people, you know, civil servants running the municipalities. And I'm afraid until we sort out the demise of the functionality of our municipalities, it's going to be very difficult, because as the debt climbs, it becomes more difficult for the municipalities to actually pay it back. And of course, as the price of electricity climbs, the municipalities tend to have a greater number of defaulters who aren't paying. And therefore, they actually run into further debt. So it's a combination of debt owing, interest on that debt, and growing debt as the price gap excludes the large percentage of our population from being able to afford electricity. And therefore, they have very few options, but one of them is not to pay, which is very, very awkward or unfair on those citizens who do pay their municipal bills. And so any talk of scrapping debt doesn't seem to me to be particularly fair on those who have been paying all these years, only to see those who haven't been paying kind of walk away, as it were. So yeah, it's a major problem and has been for a long time. And no one's really grasped it with solutions of how to solve this problem.
Yeah, and as you're saying, it is unfair, Clyde, but also unsustainable for us to continue that way. And as Cosatu, Matthews, you have also suggested through your Eskom social compact that you initiated that customers rather pay Eskom directly. Clyde was speaking now about the option of not paying, which of course would be unfair and unsustainable. But you're saying that, look, people should go directly to Eskom and rather have the municipalities cut out because they clearly are unable to meet those debts.
Yeah, good evening. Thanks for having us. So look, we're dealing with multiplicity, a very, very serious crisis. But look, for any functioning modern economy to work, you have to have reliable and affordable electricity. And Eskom can't operate, like any other business couldn't operate, if half of its customers pay, another half of the customers might pay, may not pay, may pay sometime down the road. That's just not sustainable. No petrol station, no restaurant could operate if only half the customers chose to pay. And that's the current situation right now, that people often pay to municipalities who then don't hand over the money to Eskom. And despite Treasury's good efforts, 2 years ago, to say, look, here's a debt relief package to Eskom of 253 billion rand. Here's a debt relief package of about 80 billion rand to these municipalities. It's deeply alarming that Eskom is getting itself out of a hole, but municipalities are going and digging that hole deeper and deeper and deeper. And Eskom is right to say if this issue is not resolved, Eskom is not a viable business, and that means the entire economy will collapse. So we've got to have a solution. We think number one is that, look, Eskom has to be assisted. Eskom can't be bailing out, cannot be a piggy bank or slush fund for dysfunctional municipalities. So we've got to fix Eskom, because that's the solution to the entire economy. So let's allow customers to pay Eskom directly, like half the country does do, in fact. You can work at a scenario where municipalities do need to recover their monies because of their infrastructure, their contribution to the grid or transmission, distribution infrastructure, etc. And that's fine. But we can't have the situation right now where municipalities simply choose to rob Eskom for other funding issues. But it does also mean that we do need to have a very frank and urgent conversation about what is an alternative funding model for municipalities, because many municipalities use Eskom electricity tariffs to cross-subsidize poorer communities, to cross-subsidize other municipal functions. And that's fine, let's have that discussion. But what we can't do is to implode Eskom, because that means the entire economy is going to go down the drain. And the situation is urgent. If you see that currently the debt is about 82 billion rand, Eskom estimates by end of the financial year, it will reach 100 billion rand, and that by in 4 years' time, it could have doubled to 200 billion rand. And there's no amount of bailing out that government can do for Eskom to resolve that scenario. So we've got to fix it, and fix it urgently. At the same time, we've got to find a solution to fix municipalities, but we can't allow one crisis to implode another crisis.
And while we're talking about finding a solution to fix municipalities, that is something that obviously will not happen overnight as well. We also saw the Eskom CFO, Khalib Kasim, he's saying that when looking at this incentivized program, those who are actually the problematic municipalities are historically the problematic municipalities. So whether they are incentivized or not, they continue on this path. Matthew, what do you think the solution is there in the meantime when we have the same problematic repeat offenders, per se, to put it mildly? I mean, you know, these municipalities go over and over and it's the same suspects all the time. If they can't be voted out for new leadership to come in, for instance, what is then the solution in the interim?
Yeah, look, some of them you're right, and it tends to be the same delinquent culprits time and again. Some of them, to be fair, is simply because they're not a sustainable rights base in that community. Some municipalities are just simply too small to survive on their own. We do need to have a discussion about perhaps consolidating, integrating some of these municipalities. I think 257 municipalities is really something we just don't have the resources for, but we should see how to consolidate them and perhaps move to a district development model. But you'll find the same ones are the ones who often don't pay municipal workers, who don't pay municipal workers' pension funds, who don't provide municipal services, causing companies to close in some of these rural towns, also cities as well. And you find at the same time in the budgets that Treasury tables at Parliament and the reviews as well, some of these municipalities actually return billions of rands of infrastructure grants given by national governments to them unspent as well, because there's a real capacity issue. So you do need to have competent political leadership. You do need to consolidate some. You also do need to appoint competent management to some of them by national or provincial government, because you will find a utilities director in charge of electricity or sewage or water, etc., or roads, all the infrastructure portfolios lacking the real experience or qualities or skills, etc. So there is a need for urgent interventions. But what we've seen over the last decade plus, a provincial national government just simply having a hands-off approach doesn't work, because we're witnessing the collapse of local government. If you look at the Auditor General's reports, they are a horror story. And the worst part is that they get worse each year. About a decade ago, we had about 10% of municipalities in distress. Today, it's about 2/3. And it's getting worse and worse each year. And we really need to see urgent interventions. We've seen progress at Eskom. We've seen progress at Transnet, at Metro Rail, for example, in some departments nationally. But what we're witnessing in local government, without me being too depressing for a Friday night, is the death of local government. And we don't have intervention quickly by national government, it's going to get worse. And what's extremely frustrating is that you just don't see SOGA or COGTA intervening. They just seem to be sleeping on the job. And so this is a crisis that really needs to exercise the minds of the highest leadership of government urgently.
Clyde, listening to Matthew there, just speaking of how much it's getting worse as well, under the backdrop of NERSA's proposed energy and electricity price increase, 30+%. Already it is a dire situation. Now you add that proposed energy increase as well, and the picture looks very bleak. What would you say then the solution would be? Are we still in a space where NERSA will be able to turn around that proposed hike increase? That is quite an astronomical figure as well and has received much backlash.
I've spoken at NERSA Eskom tariff hearings for probably the last 14 years. I can't think of one that I've missed. And at every single one, I've ignored what the price should be or the tariff should be. And I've said, fix Eskom and fix the system, and then start talking about tariffs. And every time when I get to the end of my talk, the panel at NERSA say to me, okay, so what should the panel be? What should the tariff increase be? And I've kind of inferred that it's irrelevant. If the tariff increase had been larger in the past, there would have been slightly less of a bailout. If it had been smaller, there would have been more of a bailout, until such time as both Eskom and the dysfunctional municipalities were fixed. So I did a study for the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure I think it was in 2020. I looked at a whole number of towns. I won't mention any of them, but just to give you an example, there were 2 towns of the same size. They both used the same amount of electricity. And in one of them, they had a surplus of 150 million rand a year from their electricity sales, and the other one had a deficit of 50 million rand a year from electricity sales. And it goes without saying then that to try and motivate the civil servants in the one that had a deficit of 50 million was an impossible task, because they couldn't even fix stuff that they knew was broken because there was no budget. So it very, very much comes down to exactly what Matthew said, is it's competency, the ability to spend money that's been given to you, a plan of fixing the infrastructure, and the notion that municipalities still make a profit from distribution of electricity is probably not quite correct at the moment. I think a lot of them that are suffering very high levels of so-called non-technical losses are actually, they're buying 100 units and only selling 70. And so they're actually in a loss-making situation from electricity sales. And so there seems to be no hope of repairing those delinquent ones. What I would suggest is pick the 5 worst ones, 5 that are sort of okay, and the 5 best ones, and intervene in those 15 municipalities, cross-referencing good practice and bad practice and helping them out. And it's actually the very bad ones that need the most help. And just see what comes of that. But actually put in serious interventions. And I like Matthew's idea of perhaps consolidating some of the smaller municipalities where they just don't have the people on staff. I mean, I wonder how many of them actually have electrical engineers appointed to the municipal team that can actually advise on what the distribution network needs. So it clearly needs to be a grouping together of some of these poorer municipalities where they can at least share some management and professional technical help across all of the municipalities that form part of that particular cluster.
And 2028 is not that far at all before we get to that deadly threat of 200 billion rand in debt. But thank you so much to you, gentlemen, for having this conversation with us this evening. Really appreciate it.